Foreigners looking at us right now, I think they think we're losing interest. The previous administration didn't have a single budget for defense that even kept up with inflation, and unfortunately...
Right there, that line you just heard, that's the moment the room tightens. McConnell doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't pound the table. He does something far more dangerous for Rubio. He calls out what he sees as the previous administration's failure on its own turf, defense spending. Watch what he does. He frames the Trump years as drifting, shrinking, and signaling weakness to the world, and he drops it with the calm confidence of someone who knows the numbers and knows exactly how to use them. This is why this exchange matters. You've got McConnell, the seasoned operator who's watched decades of foreign policy cycles come and go, laying down a case that America's posture is slipping, that allies think we're fading, and that adversaries are circling because the last administration couldn't even meet inflation on defense budgets. Rubio walks into this having to defend soft power cuts, foreign aid shifts, and a completely redefined strategic map. And once McConnell finishes laying out that narrative, Rubio has no choice but to respond, and you're going to see him start tightening around the edges as he tries to pull the conversation back toward the safest possible talking points. But the real tension sits underneath the words. One of these men is pushing for a full-throated assertion of American leadership, and the other is trying to justify a scaled-back model without looking like he's conceding ground. And what makes it even sharper is that McConnell never directly accuses him of anything. He just lines up the numbers, the history, the global signals, and practically dares Rubio to tell him he's wrong. So let's roll into the full exchange. Watch the groundwork McConnell is laying, because every piece of it becomes a trap Rubio tries to climb out of later.
You're up.
Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Obviously, there are two ways to prevent war and to maintain America's position in the world. Hard power, soft power. Over my years here, the people that have spoken mostly about the importance of soft power have been generals who know the cost of war. So we're talking about saving money, and I'm all for that. Let's take a look at what it costs to have an actual war. 37% of our GDP in World War II spent on defense, 13% in Korea, 9% in Vietnam. The Reagan buildup, about 6% of GDP. It worked. They didn't want to mess with us because they knew how strong we were going to be. And an equal partner, much less costly, is the soft power side. I think, I don't care what you call it or how you reorganize, but the basic functions that soft power provides are extremely important. You get a lot of friends for not much money. And we're being outmaneuvered, as you well know, in country after country after country by the People's Republic of China, who are effectively playing in ways that are more effective than we are. So if you can figure out how to way to reorganize it and call it whatever you will, that role is extremely important. How are foreigners looking at us right now? I think they think we're losing interest. The previous administration didn't have a single budget for defense that even kept up with inflation. And unfortunately, because of the continuing resolution this year, it looks like more of the same. So it strikes me, no matter how well the tariffs, for example, work out, that the perception at the beginning of this administration is that we want to fight with our allies and figure out some way to make an agreement with our enemies, which brings me to Ukraine. And I think the America that I believe in, and most of us believe in, would find no equivalence between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And so I'm hoping as this administration moves forward, it doesn't end up not facing the actual enemies we have now, North Korea, China, Russia, Iran's proxies, by working with our allies to stand up to them. Just to take a specific example of how soft power makes a difference, look at a country like...
Okay, pause right there, because what McConnell is doing in this long opening isn't just speechifying, it's strategic framing. Every single section of that monologue is a pressure point aimed directly at Rubio's policy stance. First, listen to the way McConnell walks through the cost of war. 37% of GDP in World War II, double digits in Korea and Vietnam, 6% in the Reagan buildup. He's drawing a straight line. Strength is expensive, weakness is deadly. And he's doing it to corner Rubio into admitting that slashing soft power budgets while letting defense slip under inflation is not a path to global stability. Then he pivots, and this is where the subtle confrontation begins, into soft power. He's not dismissing hard power, he's reinforcing it. But he's saying, look, our generals, the people who've seen the real cost of failure, understand the value of non-military influence. And by pointing out that China is outmaneuvering the United States in country after country, he's telling Rubio, your team fell asleep on the field. Watch how he phrases it. The previous administration didn't have a single defense budget that kept up with inflation. That is not an offhand comment. That is a direct indictment of the administration Rubio is implicitly tied to. He's saying the perception abroad is that America is losing interest, retreating, cutting the exact tools that stop wars before they start. And then comes the sharpest part, the line that really sets up the confrontation. McConnell says, the early perception of the new administration is that they want to fight with our allies and figure out some way to make an agreement with our enemies. That is not soft language. That's McConnell accusing Rubio's side of flipping the strategic map upside down, alienating partners, courting adversaries, and muddying U.S. moral clarity on Ukraine. He then brings up Burma as a practical case study, a place where he says the U.S. got outmaneuvered while China moved with precision and follow-through. That's a direct hit on Rubio's argument that cutting or reshaping aid doesn't cost us influence. So by the time he finally says, I'd be interested in your observations, this isn't a request. This is a challenge. A big one. McConnell has laid out historical precedent, global perception, budgetary math, and geopolitical consequences of American disengagement. And now he turns the microphone toward Rubio with a question that's really a demand. Explain how your strategy doesn't weaken the United States. And that's why the next clip is crucial, because Rubio walks in with a calm tone, but you can hear him carefully navigating McConnell's trap lines. This is where the defensive posture starts to show.
Burma, that you've had an interest in, and I have too over the years. Horrible place run by despicable people. Lots of storms and problems of one kind or another. The Chinese are in there just operating effectively. And we, because of not honoring contracts and some of the other things that we were doing to try to be helpful, just completely getting outmaneuvered. So having had to endure that, I'd be interested in your observations about what you think about soft power and how important it is to this country's future.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think soft power has the Department of State ultimately is a soft power entity. I mean, it's the Department of Peace. The Department of War is a Department of Defense. Our job is to try to prevent them. And so I do think that the model you've outlined, especially during the Cold War, was quite useful because during that time, that model served to keep societies from collapsing and becoming susceptible to Marxist regimes taking them over. That was the biggest fear during the Cold War, was that governments with high levels of poverty would be attracted to a Marxist revolution that would overthrow an allied government and create another satellite state for the Soviet Union. We live in a different world today. The threats look different. In some cases, fragility is still a factor, but it is largely a factor that will lead to either a costly humanitarian crisis, and in some cases, operating in safe haven spaces for radical jihadists to threaten us here at home. So the concept remains true. How it's applied is what has changed, because I think the context, and in that context, no matter how much even with these reductions that are proposed before you, we would still be the single largest foreign aid donor on the planet by multiples. I mean, no one even comes close. I think Germany was second, if I recall the last time I checked, and it's not even close. That remains the case. What we have to do now is apply that soft power to the places where it matters most to our national interests and to the programs that can make the biggest difference, the biggest impact in furthering our national interests. I think it's possible to both be a humanitarian and at the same time further the national interest. And there are cases where perhaps there isn't going to be a national interest argument. We just do it because we don't want people to die, or we want to help alleviate suffering. The case of Burma is an example. It wasn't just a reduction in aid because we had teams on the ground. It was actual local authorities that prevented us from getting involved or allowing certain aid to be distributed because they were in the middle of their own conflicts internally in the midst of it. So some of these environments where we're trying to deliver aid are quite challenging. Even if we provide the money, we struggle to get it to the recipients because of some local impediment on the ground that could include, for example, in the case of Haiti, armed gangs that will hijack humanitarian shipments and steal them. Just steal them as soon as they come into the country. So it's not that we care less about.
Rubio's reply starts off measured, polished, and almost academic. But watch closely. The tone isn't confidence, it's containment. He knows McConnell just laid out a sweeping critique, and his job now is to minimize the damage without stepping into any of the traps embedded in that critique. He opens by redefining the State Department as the Department of Peace, positioning soft power as noble, necessary, even foundational. That's smart. He's showing respect for the concept McConnell hammered. But notice what he does next. He subtly shifts the whole debate away from strategy and toward context. He says the Cold War threats were different, the world has evolved, and that soft power must now be applied more selectively. Here's the key. Rubio isn't arguing against McConnell directly. He's trying to move the battlefield. Instead of responding to the charge that U.S. disengagement has empowered China or weakened alliances, he frames the issue as modern complexity, fragile states, jihadist safe havens, humanitarian crises, and logistical bottlenecks. In other words, it's not that we don't want to help, the world is just harder now. Then he deploys a defensive numbers play. Even with reductions, the U.S. is still the largest foreign aid donor by multiples. This is meant to undercut McConnell's geopolitical warning by suggesting America isn't actually stepping back. At least not statistically. But that doesn't address McConnell's central point. Leadership isn't measured in spreadsheets. It's measured in impact and perception. And that's where Rubio starts getting shaky. Because instead of responding to McConnell's examples of strategic failure, he shifts to logistical bottlenecks, local authorities blocking aid, countries engulfed in internal conflict, armed gangs in Haiti stealing shipments. Those are real issues, but they're not what McConnell asked. McConnell's critique was about strategy, commitment, and geopolitical competition. Rubio answers with operational obstacles. This is the moment, right here, where the balance of power in the exchange becomes obvious. McConnell's framing was sweeping: global positioning, deterrence, alliance strength, America's image. Rubio's answer narrows: difficult conditions, distribution challenges, operational risk management. And that narrowing tells you everything. Rubio is retreating into the technical because the strategic ground is too exposed. Pay attention to how Rubio talks about Haiti. He emphasizes that aid gets stolen the moment it arrives. It's a real problem, but in the context of McConnell's question, it sounds like a concession that U.S. influence has eroded so far that the U.S. can't even ensure delivery without empowering criminal groups. That completely reinforces McConnell's warning. Adversaries and non-state actors fill vacuums America creates. And this is the point in the exchange where Rubio stops driving the conversation and starts reacting to it. He's not shaping the issue, he's explaining around it. McConnell asked, Why is China eating our lunch? Why do allies think we're backing away? Why did the last administration shrink our deterrence posture? Why does the new administration look like it's fighting allies while appeasing enemies? Rubio never answers those directly. He gives a philosophical view about modernization, a logistical view about aid distribution, and a moral view about humanitarian responsibility, but nothing that challenges McConnell's core argument. This is why this exchange hits differently. There's no shouting, no insults, no viral soundbite attack lines. What you're watching is far more revealing. A senior figure calmly laying out a case that U.S. global leadership is slipping, and a key defender of prior policy working to keep the conversation out of the zones where that argument lands hardest. And in hearings like this, the person who controls the frame usually wins the exchange. McConnell set the terms. Rubio tried to work around them. And the contrast is unmistakable. What makes this hearing especially interesting from a political perspective is that both men are seasoned, both understand foreign policy, and neither is reckless. This isn't a hot-tempered exchange. It's a strategic clash about what America is now and what it should be. McConnell clearly believes the U.S. must operate from a position of overwhelming strength both militarily and through robust, consistent soft power. His argument is that when the U.S. steps back, others step in. And those others, particularly China, don't share our values, our principles, or our interests. Rubio, on the other hand, is trying to present a world in which strength is still essential, but must be paired with selective engagement, targeted aid, and a more flexible foreign policy model. But the problem for Rubio is that McConnell's examples show selective engagement hasn't worked as intended. The U.S. didn't get more efficient, it got outmaneuvered. You can see this tension most clearly in their divergent views on Burma. McConnell frames it as a strategic failure, an instance where the U.S. lost influence and China filled the vacuum. Rubio reframes it as logistical interference by local authorities. Those two explanations sit in completely different political worlds. One says the U.S. is slipping, the other says the challenges are circumstantial. The same dynamic plays out with Haiti. Rubio points to gangs stealing aid shipments to explain why U.S. money doesn't always reach its destination. But from a geopolitical standpoint, that argument unintentionally proves McConnell's point. Soft power only works when you have enough influence and stability to deliver it effectively. If local actors can derail entire aid operations, that means American leverage is weaker than it used to be. And McConnell's broader point, the one Rubio never directly pushes back on, is that the world sees this weakness. Allies see it. Adversaries exploit it. And even if the U.S. is still spending more on aid than anyone else, that doesn't matter if the strategic payoff is diminishing. This clash also highlights a deeper political divide within conservative foreign policy. McConnell comes from the traditional Republican national security doctrine, robust defense spending, strong alliances, active diplomacy, and global leadership. Rubio is trying to navigate a post-Trump GOP environment that is more skeptical of foreign commitments but still wants to maintain moral clarity and strategic deterrence. That tension is visible in the way Rubio keeps emphasizing humanitarian motives. He repeatedly stresses that the U.S. wants to alleviate suffering and prevent crises. That's a shift from McConnell's framing, which is rooted firmly in national interest and hard results. Where McConnell talks about deterrence and influence, Rubio talks about compassion and obstacles. The contrast is stark. What you're seeing in this hearing isn't just a policy debate, it's the ideological friction of a party trying to redefine its foreign policy identity. And the reason this exchange matters is because McConnell never abandons the old foundational principle: American strength is non-negotiable. Rubio, meanwhile, is trying to articulate a modernized approach without undermining that core belief, but in doing so, he ends up sounding like he's managing retreat rather than projecting confidence. And that's why, by the end of the exchange, Rubio feels like he's firefighting. He spends the closing minutes explaining why things are hard, why aid gets blocked, why conditions are unstable, why money can't always move. Those explanations are real, but politically, they're defensive. He's explaining limitations instead of projecting solutions. McConnell, meanwhile, doesn't need to say another word. His point has already landed. If America isn't leading, someone else is. And the world notices. This is why hearings like this matter, not because they feature fireworks in the traditional sense, but because they reveal where power, confidence, and narrative control actually lie. And in this exchange, McConnell walked in with the framing, delivered the framing, and never lost control of it. Rubio worked hard to hold his ground, but by the end, he was responding to McConnell's world, not defining his own. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing? And what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?